What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. In today's video we are checking out the latest action camera from AKASO. The one that I have here today is called the AKASO V50 Pro, the special edition. So about 3 years ago AKASO had a super popular action camera called the V50 Pro. Well, the V50 Pro, the special edition, is basically an updated version of that super popular camera that they had about 3 years ago. The camera looks pretty much identical to the original V50 Pro, but to this one we do get a USB-C charging port on the side. With the old V50 Pro, that used to be a mini USB port, and of course there are some changes inside the camera as well. Alright, so for the box, this one comes in a different looking box compared to the original V50 Pro, but inside the box you're gonna find all the accessories and mounts that you used to get to the original V50 Pro. So we have a couple of batteries in there, we have a remote control and everything else that we used to get with the original V50 Pro. Alright, so from what I've noticed, this new one, so the V50 Pro, the special edition, gets better image stabilization, also gets a better internal microphone and better video quality for certain resolutions. And since we are talking about that, I think we are gonna start by checking out a couple of sample recordings just so you can see how the new image stabilization works on this one. So the image stabilization is available at most resolutions supported by the camera except 1080p at 90 frames per second and 720p at 120 frames per second. So those resolutions you don't get any type of stabilization. And with that being said, let me show you some sample recordings so you can see how that stabilization works when walking, when running and when biking. So let's check them out. Alright, next we're gonna do a bit of a running test. So I'm currently walking and trying to keep the camera as steady as possible. We are recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, so let's go running for a bit. We'll turn around here and we'll go this way. For our next test for image stabilization, I am recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and as you can see for yourself, I will be riding the bicycle. So we'll go this way. This is also an electric bicycle, so we'll have to see how this goes with the electric bicycle, because it kind of accelerates when I pedal. So we are gonna turn left somewhere around here, and we'll go this way. It's also a bit windy, so you're probably gonna hear a lot of wind. We're gonna turn right somewhere around here. So yeah, this is how a recording would look like and how the image stabilization works while riding a bicycle. Alright, so compared to the original AKASO V50 Pro, the stabilization on this one is definitely improved. But if you'd be to compare this one to something like the GoPro 10 or even the GoPro 9, well, there is really no comparison. So the image stabilization works decent, but definitely not the best that I have seen on an action camera. Next we're gonna move on and check out a couple of sample recordings so you can see how the internal microphone inside this camera works. So let's watch those couple of recordings that I have. We have our first microphone test with the AKASO V50 Pro, the special edition. I'm currently recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. I also have the image stabilization on, and as you can see for yourself, I am outside. It is a super sunny day, but also a bit windy, so you may hear some wind aside from my voice. So yeah, this is how the internal microphone in the AKASO V50 Pro, the special edition, would record the sound. Alright, and we're moving on to a quick microphone test indoors. So this time around I am in my office. It is fairly quiet out here, even though I do have the window open, so you may hear some noise from the outside, but it is fairly quiet out here. I'm currently recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and of course I'm holding the camera about 2 feet from my face, so that's how far the camera is. And this is how the internal microphone would pick up sound under these conditions. So in a fairly quiet room, I'm gonna say. And as you've heard for yourself, the internal microphone in the V50 Pro, the special edition, so this one has been improved when compared to the internal microphone that we used to have inside the AKASO V50 Pro, so the original one. So this one gets a better internal microphone. Now with this one, I'm not sure if we can actually use an external microphone. I know that with the old V50 Pro we are able to use an external microphone, but I haven't heard anything from AKASO if we can use an external microphone with this one or not, and I don't have a USB-C microphone around here to try it out. Alright, next we're gonna move on and check out some more sample recordings that I've done at different resolutions. Here I've noticed that this one has improved 4K recordings, but the 1080p recordings actually looked worse than we used to get on the original V50 Pro. So I'll let you guys watch those sample recordings and I will be right back. Alright, we are moving on to another quick recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. It is a super sunny day, but also a bit windy. So you may hear some wind aside from my voice. We have the castle at the top there. And my little bicycle that way. And a bunch of flowers everywhere, as you can see. So yeah, this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with the image stabilization on would look like on the AKASO V50 Pro, the special edition. Alright, and we are moving on to our next recording. For this recording we are doing 1080p at 30 frames per second, and of course at this resolution we get image stabilization as well. I mean, if you're getting that at 4K at 30, you're obviously gonna get it in 1080p at 30 frames per second. I'm gonna stop somewhere around here. We are gonna pan right slowly. And back left. So towards the mountain. So yeah, 1080p at 30 frames per second on the AKASO V50 Pro, the special edition. Okay, next I switched the resolution to 1080p at 60 frames per second. You can also record in 1080p at 90 frames per second. However, at 1080p at 90 frames per second, you don't get image stabilization. So you get stabilization if you're doing 1080p at 30 or 1080p at 60. So we are currently doing 1080p at 60 frames per second in the same spot where I was recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second earlier, just so you can see the difference in video quality. So 1080p at 60 frames per second on the AKASO V50 Pro, the special edition. We are moving on to our next recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Around here we have a combination of sunshine and shade. I wanted to show you how the camera does if you'd be to record in this kind of a situation. So a place where you have a lot of shade but also a lot of sunshine. So we're gonna pan right towards the sun and back left towards the shadier area, and we'll walk this way for a bit. So 4K at 30 frames per second on the AKASO V50 Pro, the special edition. Alright, and it's time for some low light footage. It finally got dark. I'm currently recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second. It's getting dark, it's not totally dark, and of course we have a bunch of street lights around. So it is darker around here. Of course the quality is not gonna be as good as the quality that you would get during the day, but just so you get an idea how the footage from this camera would look like if you're filming on the street at night and you have some street lights. Alright, and I've switched the resolution now to 4K at 30 frames per second. As you can see, it's still dark out. I mean, it's been about 10 minutes since I did a previous recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second. I also have Laura filming me, and she's walking backwards basically. I'm probably getting too close to her. So I'm gonna have her pan the camera that way, just so you can get an idea of how dark the sky is. So it's not total darkness. I mean, we have some street lights around here, but just so you get an idea of the video quality that you're gonna be able to get when it gets dark, because most people are gonna be filming in these kind of conditions. So yeah, this whole recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with the AKASO V50 Pro, the special edition, would look like. Okay, so as you've seen for yourself, the footage from this one has been improved for certain things when compared to the original V50 Pro. So if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, that is the maximum recording resolution for this camera. And if you're recording during the day, the footage definitely looks better than the original footage that we used to get with the original V50 Pro. But if you're recording in 1080p, I just don't find that footage good looking in any way. So you're better off to record only in 4K at 30 frames per second with this camera. Now, if you're recording at night, this camera doesn't do good at all. I think it's actually worse than the original V50 Pro that we got 3 years ago. Now, that is kind of the case with most action cameras these days, so none of them does that great if you're recording in low light. So always keep that in mind. It's best to use an action camera for daytime recordings. I've also noticed that the menu system inside this one, so the V50 Pro, the special edition, has been modified, changed when compared to the original one. So next I'm gonna film all the settings that there are available, just so you can see, in case you're wondering what's new, what's available, and so on. So I'm gonna play a fast forward clip of that and I'll let you guys watch it. So there you have it. This is the new AKASO V50 Pro, the special edition. So you basically get better video quality if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. You get better stabilization when compared to the old one, and you also get the better internal microphone. Alright guys, hopefully this video was useful. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.